Welcome back to Market on Close. Let's keep the earnings discussion going, and we'll welcome in Alex Hamerstone, the Advisory Solutions Director at Trusted Sec. Alex, thanks for being with us. NVIDIA was the big story today, but we have bigger movers today in Snowflake and CrowdStrike. CrowdStrike down about 7% right now. So let's start with them, taking a hit after their sales projections didn't quite meet expectations. What were some of your key takeaways from the report on the whole?
I think it's really fascinating to watch these companies as they kind of navigate, all the changes to the environment. And I think they're still going to be a very strong player, right? They're going to continue to grow. I think that they've, obviously have some pressure from absorbing, last year's outage, but they're still a really strong name. And then as they work through that, I think they're going to continue to do well. Especially as they really continue to adapt and push the AI-enabled security platforms. I think that's going to continue to be the future. And I think they'll continue to be a strong player. It's really tough these days to kind of be measured quarter by quarter when a lot of times, especially for these enterprise platforms, it's a much longer horizon.
It was arguably a strong second quarter. It just got overshadowed by that one number. As you look at the second quarter numbers, they did come in as beats on both the top and the bottom. But this whole earnings season has been a guidance story, and even inline guidance hasn't been enough here. Do you think it's too unforgiving, especially of a company that has been a recovery story since they had their massive Falcon crash last summer?
My personal view, yes. The market has been obviously unique the past 6 months and a year, and kind of seeing, a lot of things are moving around that we might not expect. But I think it's interesting because, a number of years ago in the security space, these were all new names, right? And now you have certain ones that are bigger and, really have made inroads into the enterprises. And it seems a little bit more difficult for some of these startups to really make way through it. But I think we're going to continue to see these large players continue to grow. They're pretty sticky with customers. They're well known and they're trusted.
And, I want to talk, too, about the timing of the report coming out and the announcement of the purchase of Onum, that they're going to be buying this. Not a lot of answers yet, obviously going to get more answers on the call here with some details about this deal. But the deal comes out, is announced at the exact time the earnings were supposed to come. And then we were on hold for about, 6 or 7 minutes there. Do you think that was by design?
It's impossible to know, right? But it certainly is interesting. As a practitioner and someone that follows, all these different, names pretty closely, it was surprising. But I have really no idea the reason for it or whether it was intentional.
Yeah, it's so interesting because anytime anything deviates from the norm, we're all asking the question, was that on purpose? And how influential do you think this acquisition is going to be? Not a lot of details again yet, but they're saying, this is going to help next gen Falcon. And obviously Falcon is still in its turnaround story after that massive outage.
Absolutely. Like anything that remains to be seen, I really think in this space, consolidation is going to continue. Anyone, that's able to really offer multiple services under one sales umbrella, I think is going to benefit from that. As a practitioner, years ago, we were used to having all these different products that you manage separately. But the more things I think that we can pull under kind of one umbrella there, the better off people are going to be. I think, organizations, for years have been, spending a lot of money on cybersecurity and still seeing all these breaches. So they're really looking for, platforms and kind of single places they can go to manage their risk.
So CrowdStrike down about 7.5%. I want to flip over now to Snowflake, up more than 11% on their earnings news. They had a revenue beat. They had really solid guidance, though, so a different story here. Key thoughts when you first saw the Snowflake numbers come out?
Not surprised. It's what do we always talk about? One of the most important resources is data these days. And so anybody that can help you do something with that data, manage that data and get information from it, I think it's going to continue to do well. Snowflake's, they're seeing competition, in a few different spots. But, with their cloud agnostic model, and they're really trusted and deep into these enterprises. So not surprised to see them doing well at all.
And for Snowflake, coming in with this considerably higher product revenue forecast than what was expected, how important is that they continue to beat on these numbers, knowing that there is so much competition, biting right at their heels?
I think it's of course it's important, right? But I think that, again, you just start to see, as I mentioned, is that, a number of years ago, these were all new companies. You have so many companies that just a few years ago were not household names, and now everyone's familiar with them, and that enterprises are continuing to adopt. And I think the more that you can become sticky, the more that you can really get ingrained and be trusted. The practitioners know how to use your products. They're familiar with the outcomes. The better off you'll be. It's going to be much more difficult for competitors to make inroads in those cases.
And, knowing that this is such a fast growth story, we didn't know who these companies were, and now we're talking about them on at least a weekly basis, if not a daily basis here. Are you bullish on the growth trajectory here? Are they still going to be on the tip of everyone's tongue for the foreseeable future?
It will not surprise me. We're certainly creating more and more data every day. And I think, as we heard before, AI is continuing to change everything. I think that, what fascinates me is the things that I would have predicted or kind of said about the current environment with AI a few months ago would be completely different now. And it really seems to be accelerating. And I think that we're starting to figure out, where in the short term it's going to be really effective and helpful, and what might take a little bit longer. So I think we'll see continued growth.
And as far as continued growth, will they continue along the pace that we're seeing here? And also want to come back to CrowdStrike just because they're taking such a beating on that one number, and it wasn't even a hugely significant miss here. Do you think there's still potential for a turnaround on the call here if something significant is said about this acquisition or perhaps something else?
I think that's always possible. If I could predict that, I'd probably drive a much nicer car, right? If I was able to see those things. But it's really, I think the expectations for growth are so high for so many tech companies that it can be tough to keep up with that, right? Especially those of us that are older, remember the old days, growth like this would be really unheard of. And so the expectations are high. Hopefully we can continue to grow and meet them, but it'll be interesting to see for sure.
Well, Alex, we appreciate you being with us to talk some of our smaller tech earnings today after NVIDIA. That's Alex Hamerstone from Trusted Sec. Again, Snowflake up 12% after their earnings.